Okay, so we're here with Mark Elliott from Better Bike. Hey, Mark. So you biked up here. That's a good thing.
Try and bike everywhere.
Really? Do you have a car?
I do have a car, so I'm one of those cyclists who has a dual identity as a cyclist and motorist, but generally I do prefer the bike perspective.
What's the bike perspective?
The bike perspective is on top of two wheels and usually moving more quickly than traffic here in LA, slightly higher point of view, and much more agile. That's what I think about the bike perspective.
Cool. So do you do mostly commuter type biking, or do you also get out on the weekends and just ride around?
I do both. Mostly I tend to be a kind of utility cyclist or commuter cyclist, recreational boulevard riding cyclist. And in the past I had a regular kind of sport route that took me up in the hills and over the valley, and kind of would make this maybe 90-minute circuit, but lately it's mostly been about just riding the boulevards.
You don't do the sport route anymore?
I don't really do the sport route anymore, only because it seems like I can kind of weave in my cycle riding with errands I have to do, or I go get a nice cup of coffee here or there, and it's just a little bit more, I guess, time effective.
And so you are, what position do you have with the Better Bike? And can you tell me about that?
Sure. I organized Better Bike Beverly Hills back in, I guess, early 2010, when I was, like a lot of cyclists, riding across town, happened to be riding across town that day, and riding through my town. I live in Beverly Hills, and just wondering, where are the bike lanes? Where's the signage? After a close call or two with a motorist, thinking, exactly, where is my city on bike facilities and bike infrastructure? So, as a planner, I'm educated as a city planner. I thought, well, the first place to look is my city's general plan. What does the circulation element or the mobility element, what does that say about bicyclists and bicycling? And of course, I found this really pathetic bike plan. And as I'm looking over this bike plan, just a 4 or 5 page long bike plan, I realized, this is just totally pro forma. And there's no real mention of facilities or programs, nothing about implementation or anything. It was just kind of an outrage. So I started making some calls, and I realized that my city just doesn't have any stand on active transportation whatsoever. It's just all about the motorists.
Beverly Hills.
That is Beverly Hills.
What is it about your city that would make it not more interested in biking?
Well, we have, like a lot of places in LA area, we have this, latent population of cyclists, would-be cyclists who would take a bike for the errands, or would maybe send their kids to school on a bike, would even commute on a bike, because we're just in a great position in the West Side, kind of a keystone piece of the West Side, transportation-wise. And we have this population that would bike, if they thought that it was safe, if they thought that they might find some protection or might find a welcome. You have to realize that my city is a fairly wealthy city, but we haven't installed a bike rack probably in 5 years, and that's just the kind of the overall negative welcome that cyclists get in Beverly Hills.
And I hear about Beverly Hills also opposing public transportation projects like rail. To be fair, we don't reject it anymore. Back in the 80s, when the Red Line was being built, Beverly Hills was one of those kind of standout communities that just went to the boards. We don't want rail, and of course, there was this problem with the gas explosion, and then Henry Waxman in D.C. eliminated federal subsidies for the line, so we didn't really have to press any more on that. So now cut to the last few years when we're talking about the West Side Rail extension, and it turns out that now Beverly Hills welcomes it because they see it as possibly an economic boost. So we are on record as supporting the rail. However, where other transit's concerned, like a bus rapid transit line, no, we Beverly Hills, we're not supporting bus rapid transit on Wilshire. Not supporting bus rapid transit.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, it's a good question. Bus rapid transit, just in a nutshell, is on Wilshire Boulevard, probably the heaviest traveled west side route for public transit. Do we want to provide bus-only lanes, perhaps bus and bicycle shared lanes for that corridor to help move all those poor souls who are sitting on a Metro Rapid bus like the 720 line? Do we want to help move them cross town more quickly? And Beverly Hills is one of the communities that said, no, we really don't. And I don't know that we've actually taken a position opposing, but we have not supported it. And Bill Rosendahl also kind of came to the defense of some of his Condo Canyon communities on western Wilshire, who also didn't support turning over a lane to mass transit. And so there's now City of Los Angeles has approved a bus rapid transit line with these pieces missing, like Condo Canyon, and of course Beverly Hills, which is a famous choke point for auto congestion. We're not supporting dedicated lanes for transit through our town either. If you think about it, it would be a wonderful idea to devote a lane to mass transit all along Wilshire, this heavily traveled spine, move people more quickly, encourage people to take transit, maybe make it a shared bike lane as well, encourage people to get on the bikes, but of course, it's just easier to kind of now piecemeal this thing, and so it just doesn't look so good for bus rapid transit on Wilshire.
It's easier to piecemeal it. You mean oppose it in pieces, or?
Oh no, I'm sorry. Piecemeal it as in, well, let's move ahead with bus rapid transit or dedicated bus lanes on Wilshire for this piece east of Beverly Hills, and then a piece in the west side, say west of Condo Canyon, between Condo Canyon and Santa Monica, and then we'll just have these two huge critical pieces in West LA, Condo Canyon, and in Beverly Hills that we will not provide dedicated bus lanes. So you're great if you're coming from downtown going to Santa Monica, as so many people do for their work. You're just golden until you hit the border of Beverly Hills, and then you're just chock-a-block in the congestion with every other motorist.
Do you go to the city council meetings?
Beverly Hills City Council?
Yeah.
I do. I attend Beverly Hills City Council meetings, and probably even more often we have a traffic and parking commission and also a planning commission. I attend both of those meetings, especially traffic and parking, because that's just most relevant to my work with bicycles.
What's the... are you in the minority over there, as far as your views about transportation?
I'd say in probably Beverly Hills as a whole, you have to realize it's a town that just hasn't awoken, to the possibilities of bicycles. So in that sense, we're in the minority because most folks are just a culture to being motorists. They haven't really thought about taking a bike, if they even have a bike in their garage. And yet, we're a kind of a small population of cyclists now, potentially a much bigger population. And so, in that sense, still the minority.
Well, can we pause for a second, take a call?
Sure.
This is a biker named Active. Hey, Active, you're on the air.
Hey, good morning, guys. How is everybody?
Good morning, good. We're talking about the Beverly Hills, what are we talking about? The Beverly Hills bike political organization called Better Bike, and they're trying to make more infrastructure in that city. What are you doing today, Active?
Well, today right now I'm at work. Trying to recover from a wonderful all-city toy ride we had last night.
Yeah, I was there for a little bit. How was it? What's your perspective?
You know what? It was really great. I think a lot of kids are gonna benefit from the toys. I know there was 2 charities that were gonna be giving these toys out. And everything went out without a hitch. We had a little incident with the cops harassing some riders during the ride from Alvera Street over to the warehouse, but I mean, it was a wild ride. So
yeah, I heard that. I heard there were some tickets given out.
I actually heard there was a couple of tickets given out, and somebody got arrested, and I'm trying to confirm that, so I won't even say any names yet.
Well, that's too bad. But the party went off well.
Yeah, the party went off great. I wish I could have stayed till the end. I had to leave around 1:30 in the morning because I had to go to work today.
Chicken Letter just came in. He's the hardest working videographer in the bike scene. He was there with his little camera on a stick,
It didn't look like he was videotaping anything. He was just shaking his boogie down.
He was there when what happened? There were some arrests. Did you know that?
Well, yeah, that was that one arrest I had heard about, but I hadn't had any confirmation.
Well, anyway, let's focus on the positive. The kids got the toys.
Absolutely, and everything down at the warehouse went off without a hitch. There was no problems. Everything went smoothly. People were on the RSVP guest list, and everybody got in. There was screen printing going on by Roadblock. We had some great bands playing, and the beer was flowing all night. And all in all, nothing really went wrong except for those incidents we spoke about earlier. But hopefully, all these kids are gonna get a little bit of sunshine in their unfortunate circumstances. For some of these kids, they wouldn't have had any toys for Christmas, and hopefully they can at least get something to brighten up their day.
Yeah, and there was a whole truck full of toys. It was cool to see.
Oh yeah, dude. I mean, all I kept hearing all night long was, "Where do we give the toys? Where do we give the toys?" People were just eager, and I was proud to see that riders, they didn't come with one toy. They kept, I saw riders coming with 5 and 10 toys. Why stop at one?
Really? People came with 5 and 10 toys. That's great. So the bike scene, just really pulled it together here for this.
Absolutely, and then now also the bike scene is spreading even further into the smaller municipalities around LA. You guys are talking about how Beverly Hills is trying to better their infrastructure over there for the cycling community. So hopefully that'll go, especially with the tax revenues over there. They should have an easier time having to deal with the funding for these compared to other cities that are having budget deficits.
Oh yeah, well that's something we should talk about. You probably, people probably wonder if they have money, where's the bike infrastructure? But that's what we're talking about. And so thanks for calling in. Do you want to say anything else active?
Spoken Art Right's happening tonight. Come on down to the Bike Oven. Meet up around 6 o'clock. Chicken Leather can give you guys more details later during the show. And I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I'll talk to you guys next weekend.
All right, thanks, Active. Thanks for calling.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Okay, so we're back with Mark Elliott from Better Bike in Beverly Hills, and we're talking about, the caller just said, you guys have property revenues. Why don't you have the bike infrastructure? And that's what we're pretty much explaining here, right?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking as well. We have more than property revenues. We have sales tax revenues. We're a huge sales tax generator. So I think by any measure, the city's pretty well funded. At the same time, the city's in the last that's a couple of years, with the financial crisis and all, the city has also, to some extent, hollowed out its ranks. It's sent a few people packing off in retirement, and we subcontract out more than we ever have before.
Subcontract what?
Subcontract out city services. A lot of our parks and maintenance now subcontracted out. I noticed when I looked at a recent planning agenda, one of the regular planning functions, just a garden variety planner, that's subcontracted out now. And so in a sense, we're a well-funded city, but we're also a city that's reducing services, I guess, like other cities as well.
So how does that affect the movement for more bike lanes and more bike parking and everything?
Well, the thing is, like a lot of cities, it's all about priorities. And when you look at City of Beverly Hills priorities, it's always been about motorists. We have a very kind of retail-centric view of the world. Sales tax is important to us. And it's really a lot about the retailing community. We have a pretty powerful chamber, very well connected in City Hall. And so when I talk to policymakers, their first concern is about retailing, supporting the retail base. And what I try and explain is that cyclists, we are locavores. We're local consumers. We have, even though Beverly Hills is known for Rodeo Drive and stuff like that, we have a really vibrant, small retailing community. I live right around the corner from South Beverly Drive. It's a great little strip of all different kinds of shops. From nail salons to you can get your shoes repaired, or you can get your dry cleaning. And there's a real opportunity, for city policymakers to make cyclists more welcome, not just Beverly Hills, but around, the west side, pull them in. Tell cyclists you're welcome here, and then a lot of those retailers that aren't on Rodeo Drive, the nail salons and the cleaners and the little restaurants and whatever, they'd love to have the additional traffic because the choke point in Beverly Hills is always traffic, and it's always been about accommodating the motorist. So when we talk about priorities in Beverly Hills, we're not putting in any bike infrastructure. Just for the record, we have no bike lanes. There's no signage that relates to bikes. As I mentioned, we haven't installed a bike rack in many years, but we have funded large public parking garages. We do have annually a $2.5 million deficit for parking operations, which runs those garages. So for Beverly Hills, it's always been about creating more car parking, even at public expense, even spaces that cost $30,000, $40,000 to construct, just so people can come park the cars, instead of sending the message, hey, leave the car at home, take your bike over, we'll have a rack waiting for you, we might even have a bike center. Well, that's all my vision, but it's not a reality today.
Well, you say it's got a nice a stretch for, I guess for shopping. The average person can do all that. But it's how close does it come to being, what people refer to as a livable community? Like, you know what I'm talking about?
Well, Beverly Hills is in many ways a very livable community. It's a very walkable community. Recently, we got this really great walk score from the organization that hands out walk scores for urban environment, and you can see why, because we're a beautifully planned community. Back in the 20s, when the city fathers platted out this community, they said we're going to actually plan a great community that has a mix of large residential lots and small lots. We're going to put commercial strips, kind of scatter them throughout the area. So as a result, we are a very walkable community and could be a very bikeable community as well. There's so much potential there. We're to some extent, we're kind of a well-rounded community. We kind of get a lot of attention for Rodeo Drive and those big glossy shops, but we do have a really considerable small retailer base that makes it very nice to live in Beverly Hills. It's like the old joke about France. Oh, it's a great place. Oh, but the people. And, that's kind of how I feel about living in Beverly Hills as well.
The people are what? They're too commercially centric?
Well, I guess from my kind of quasi-Marxist perspective, it's just a little bit too bourgeois in many ways. Maybe you'd expect that in Beverly Hills. But it's a town that's kind of, focused on material things, and it's fine. It's America, but there's often not a lot of room for other things. For active transportation, for example. If it's all about the cars and about the fancy car,
Yeah, that's what I was kind of. Is there? I think there are a lot. There's a lot of thinking about what making streets more bike friendly does to the whole atmosphere of a community, and I feel like there's probably a good argument already laid out for what happens when you create a lot of bike infrastructure to a community. Do you have farmers markets over there?
We do have a Sunday farmers market at our City Hall Civic Center. It's a little bit paltry. I think maybe people in Beverly Hills, maybe they, reflexively, maybe they don't just think about going to a farmer's market for the produce. So we have a Whole Foods that, kind of picks up a lot of that slack. We do have a farmer's market, but that kind of ethos, that farmer's market, bike to the local shop, independent coffee house, that's kind of not very well developed in Beverly Hills. We're also like a lot of places on the west side, we're not totally self-contained. We're a fairly small city of about, I think, 35,000, and there's ample opportunity to escape Beverly Hills. I prefer to go to Santa Monica to get a cup of coffee because I just like the vibe over there a little bit better. But there's a lot of headroom, should we say, a lot of capacity in Beverly Hills to can kind of grow that civic consciousness, that thing we see in Portland and and certain neighborhoods in Los Angeles that make them livable, diverse, well-rounded places. Beverly Hills has its limitations, but it also has a lot of room to grow in that respect. And I for one see cycling as a kind of means to get us to that expanded civic consciousness. It's not all about just material stuff. It's also about community, and we can grow a lot in that way.
Sounds good. So you are part of the LACBC. Better Bike is the regional partnership.
Yeah, we're a regional partner. Our new neighbors, West Hollywood Bicycle Coalition, they just came on the scene also. I think with LACBC, we see them really active and interested in generating these regional partners, both because it gives LACBC some energy. It kind of pushes them up from the grassroots, but also because a lot of the work that we need to do is really work that we need to do in city halls and planning commission meetings or transportation commission meetings. And LACBC, can't be everywhere. It's a county of 10 million people, and we all need local partners like Better Bike, someone to go to the council meeting to remind in public comment, remind them that, hey, we're road users too, to remind the transportation commissioners that, hey, we're talking a lot about parking garages. What about bike lane and a bike rack? We need that local presence. It's really worked in City of Los Angeles. They've made some great strides. City of Santa Monica also have made some great strides. Culver City even.
Right.
And we just want to see it happen in Beverly
Even
Hills
or
as well.
especially Culver City. Aren't they a success story to some extent?
I don't know if Culver City is a
Maybe it was
success
education.
story.
I'm sorry. It was education. I was
Yeah,
thinking.
Culver City does have a new bike plan. County Department of Public Health helped them financially help them through that plan adoption process. I'd say it's not 100% bike consciousness on City Council over there, but with the Expo line coming, they're moving forward. Santa Monica, I think, is and Los Angeles. They're the kind of the local leaders. Long Beach, when you back up and look a little bit more kind of Southland regional. Beverly Hills is still the black hole, though.
The what?
The black hole, the missing piece, the missing link.
So you are here to stop that.
I'm here to bring a little bit of the bike love to Beverly Hills and to policymakers. We have a couple of council members, 5-member council, a couple of council members. They understand, they get it. They biked as kids. They'd like to see it now as adults, as family people. And then we have got a few other council members who maybe really haven't thought about it that much. And one of our responsibilities is to kind of remind them, biking, it's a great means of transit, and it can really do a lot for Beverly Hills, where we're just so choked with car congestion. That's got to be, really, in the end, it's got to be about more than the car and more than the motorist, and we're here to bring that message home.
Well, do you have a presence there? I mean, are there cyclists who will show up to your meetings and things?
I think that's a little bit of the weak link here. I go to a lot of these meetings myself, and I hold occasional meetings for Better Bike. We can talk about strategy. We don't have a big community of cyclists. It's a fairly small city, so when you look inside Beverly Hills, there's just not a lot of cycling advocates. There's a handful. When you kind of draw that circle a little bit bigger to include West LA and edging into mid-city, there are more people, and they're interested too. I see it as a two kind of pronged strategy. One is the inside, where we who are resident can go to City Hall and say, hey, we're resident here. We need more transportation options here in Beverly Hills. But then there's a role also for the larger community, those many cyclists who move through Beverly Hills every day, going to UCLA and going to Mid-City or going to Hollywood, Santa Monica. We get a lot of cyclists coming through. We just need to wrap them up into this message and bring their message to City Hall also, because ultimately every city services the region transportation-wise, and we would like to get more cyclists on board. So if you are a cyclist, you're interested, you move through Beverly Hills, you're interested in being a part of the effort, just check out the site betterbike.org and let us know what you can do to help us along and what we can do to help you along.
Very nice. All right, I feel like Chicken Leather could lean in and say something.
I could. Actually, we've seen in just the last couple of weeks, Metro has had some workshops just to see how they could extend plans like in Figueroa and stuff. But you mentioned the black hole, and last night one of the characters I'm usually with, Will Campbell, was explaining how in fact that's what happens a lot of times. And if you're trying to get across town, it's like things that we take for granted, like bike lanes, they just sort of stop at the border. And it's funny because you don't think of something like Beverly Hills having a defined kind of border like a nation or something where a wall goes up or something, and yet it does. I used to joke about people because I would work in Century City sometimes, or I would work on the outskirts, and they'd say, "Well, you have to go through Beverly Hills," and it was like kind of a joke then. Because everything would be, you'd almost have to drive around, and it's like I wonder if they really appreciate that. Things like the Museum of Broadcasting is there too, and it's like you're constantly saying, is this a viable place to have something like that important? I'm just wondering if the venues suffer from that. I know that there's a lot of street traffic there and stuff, and the cafes and stuff, but. I'm wondering if the retail can make up for the fact that the public works, in this sense, is lacking.
Well, like I said, there's so much kind of headroom or capacity to expand the thinking in Beverly Hills, and get local retailers to recognize that cyclists are valuable for them. I mean, just think about every retailer they want more feet through the door, they want more people walking by the shop. And right now, the limiting factor in Beverly Hills is car capacity. We streets are over capacity as it is, and we're considered kind of underparked, if you can believe it. Even though we've got these big garages, when people think about coming to Beverly Hills for that cup of coffee or to buy this or that, the reflex is, Jesus, I've got to actually find a place to park in Beverly Hills, or I'm going to be circling the block, or I'm going to be, stuck on some upper level of a parking garage. And so what we want to do is encourage the retailing community to think a little more broadly, a little bit more imagination, take a little more imagination and think that, the objective here isn't to bring more cars to the city. The objective is for retailers to just bring more feet and more people by the shop. So there's a lot of headroom. We've got the cafes, we've got the small shops, we've got the kind of places you'd want to go to on an errand, but what we don't have is that kind of open embrace of cyclists to get more folks in the larger periphery to think about making Beverly Hills a stop. That said, you raise a really interesting point, and that's we're all the cities on the west side and everywhere really we're transportation wise we're porous, but in California it's a home rule state, meaning that cities enjoy so much latitude to make their own rules, to make their own transportation plans, of course, and to stop bike lanes at the city border. So if you're coming across Santa Monica Boulevard from Hollywood or West Hollywood, and you're going to Century City or City of Santa Monica, you're gonna enjoy those bike lanes until Beverly Hills, and then they disappear. And not only do those bike lanes on Santa Monica disappear, but the road actually becomes a little bit more treacherous. It's one of the most crowded routes. It might be the highest or second highest in terms of vehicle counts. And so as a cyclist, you're kind of tossed into that scrum. So you might think, geez, I'd like to avoid Beverly Hills if you could, but we're such a keystone, there's just no easy way to avoid it. You've got to drop down to Culver City to get around Beverly Hills. So in that way, we're a very important piece of the West Side transportation scene.
I wonder if you could make that argument. Culver City's getting our business.
Right. Yeah. You would like to be able to make that argument, and I think you really can. I live in Beverly Hills, and I myself would rather go to Santa Monica for a cup of coffee, or if I'm going to go to Staples, or if I need office supplies, for example, I just naturally look farther afield. If I can walk around the corner to the small shops just on South Beverly Drive, and I really love that part of the community, but if unless I'm on a bike, if I've got to go anywhere else in Beverly Hills, boy, it's a hassle. And frankly, if I'm going to drive, I guess I'd rather just go to 3rd Street, check out those small shops on 3rd Street, or go west to Santa Monica. And I think that I'm not alone that way. And I love riding. Of course, I have a bicycle. I use it all the time. So for me, it's easy. If I have to go to some other place in downtown Beverly Hills, like that museum of television and radio, I just get on my bike and I go. It's ultra convenient. I don't have a bike rack there, so I lock up to a meter. But for someone who doesn't have a bike, who doesn't naturally think about cycling, boy, are they really going to drive to Museum of Television and Radio, or maybe they'll just go somewhere else outside of town? So I think it's a great argument you can make to policymakers. The limiting factor here is just a lack of imagination. We haven't historically had it in our elected officials. We don't have it today in our transportation officials, and that's one area where we really can have a little bit of growth here. Let's think more imaginatively about transportation solutions and not just about cars and motorists.
Sounds good. So are you talking to people? Are you making this message heard? What's the response?
We're trying to get the message heard. We've seen a little bit of progress in the last year or so. We have there's been a couple of meetings of a bike plan update committee. I mentioned a few minutes ago, we have this totally paltry 5-page bike plan. The funny thing about that bike plan is it was crafted in the 1970s, and when the city was when the city was updating their general plan which was adopted in January of 2010, we literally picked up that 5-page bike plan off the shelf, dusty as it was, from the 1970s, and said, we're just going to adopt it as is. So you look at City of Los Angeles, they have this, thick bike plan with all the guidelines and implementation and everything, staged implementation. You look at City of Santa Monica, and they've invested a tremendous amount of energy in their loose and their land use and circulation element. And here, Beverly Hills, just over a year ago, adopts a bike plan from 1977 with data from that era and maps from that era. It's an outrage, and yet that's how we roll. So that's the backstory. The current story, today's story, is that we've got this bike plan update committee. It's staffed by 3 of our traffic and parking commission chairs. We bike advocates have met now at least a couple of times with them. The idea was, what if we're gonna make some bike improvements in Beverly Hills, if we're gonna lay some facilities down, where should they be? So we're looking at a pilot program. Okay, let's identify some routes, see what can be done with these routes. In the last meeting, which was back in, I want to say August, we identified 4 candidate routes. We met with them again about 4 weeks ago, and talked a little bit more about what those routes are. We heard from their contract engineer. Well, here are the 4 routes you identified. Here's what can happen on them. But the proviso was, as long as we don't touch the parking, and that's just kind of, that's a deal killer, because we've got some streets that are perfectly suited, say, for bike lanes. They see a lot of cyclists. They're near commercial areas. If we can segregate the cyclist and motor traffic, it's safer and more convenient for everyone. But when the traffic and parking commissioners lay down this kind of arbitrary, as long as we don't touch the parking criterion, what could the engineers come back and say? But if that's the framework, all we can do is suggest sharrows. So there's just no talk of bike lanes or any kind of serious bike facilities. So we've had this bike plan update committee meeting, but ultimately it's a bit of a tokenistic exercise, and so I can't say that I'm particularly optimistic, but that doesn't mean that we don't have our work cut out for us.
What's the tokenistic? What's the token?
Well, this meeting process is tokenistic because we've met with them now. I want to say 3 times with this ad hoc bike plan update committee that was formed in mid 2010. an ad hoc committee doesn't have to have public meetings, doesn't have to post. And after a bit of complaining, they said, okay, we'll have a public meeting. We'll have some bike advocates in. We'll talk about things. But now, as it's kind of rolled along a bit, seems to me, at least, my opinion is that it's a bit of a tokenistic exercise. We'll have our contract engineer look at these options for some bike facilities, but we're not going to touch the parking. We're not going to disrupt current traffic patterns. So as long as we can fit it inside that little box, sure, we'll talk about some facilities, and that way it's tokenistic because they have us in. We talk about what our needs are, and then they present some really unsatisfactory options, and we can all say, oh, we participated, but we really can't say that anything really constructive comes out of it. That's my fear. If you ask me optimistically, what do I think? Well, I think that at least folks in City Hall are talking about bike planning now.
They are.
Yeah, they're talking about it.
What about partners? I mean, the LACBC, and how do they help? And do you have? There must be people who have experience transforming cities. Small, exactly the size of Beverly Hills. Do they come and talk to you?
Well, the beauty is, there are models out there. Any of us who, bike advocates who are looking for some facilities, looking for safer travel, for a more comfortable ride. There are models out there because we've seen it done in other small cities. We've got. Boulder is making great steps on this, and we see it in neighborhoods. We see it in Portland, where they've really extended bike infrastructure. City of New York has as well. Denver is, a city like Beverly Hills.
Long
we
Beach.
don't. Pardon?
Long Beach.
Long Beach, yeah, of course, Long Beach locally. City of Beverly Hills doesn't need to invent this wheel. I tell
Right.
our policymaker and our transportation professionals, their models are out there. Let's just bring them in. So that's the good news. LACBC is very supportive. They help us with connecting us with folks who know how to think about these problems. If I hear from our transportation officials that Santa Monica Boulevard just isn't wide enough for bike lanes, I can call up LACBC, Alexis over there, the policy director, and I can say, who can you put me in touch with so I can actually run this by them? If I get the actual data from my city about the width of Santa Monica Boulevard, is there a transportation professional, a professional bike planner you can put me in touch with so I can kind of validate this? And they do that. That's a great service they provide for us. And they're also support. Alexis has showed up at a number of our meetings, and they're interested in. They see the significance of Beverly Hills, and they're behind us.
That's why we got to support the LACBC. I want to make sure that I keep up with my membership. I haven't heard from them. Maybe it's automatic. I don't know. I got to pay again.
Yeah, maybe.
So now I think organization is really important, and we had a summit of regional bike partnerships, and that's how I got in touch with you originally. It was put together by the West Hollywood Bicycle Coalition, Kevin Burton and Tess Latta. So you had an idea for another kind of summit. You want to talk about that?
When you talk about the bike summit, do you mean the Cal
No,
bike?
I mean we had on BikeTalk. You were part of it.
Oh, yes. That's right. A
And
few weeks ago,
yeah, we just got together about 7 different people from the different regional partnerships of the LACBC.
Yep. This is such a great opportunity. We've got all these bike advocates out there, and these are smart people. These are people who know the law, know the state law, know the local ordinances. People who follow developments. Where those wheels are being developed in other cities, they follow that. So we have a really broad, diverse, educated bike advocacy community, and we also have a lot of bike bloggers, people like me, who follow local developments, post about what's happening at the city council meeting or what's happened at the local council of governments meeting, and we kind of talk to each other informally. But what we haven't done really is start to pull some of these regional folks together so that I can know a little bit more about what's happening in San Gabriel Valley or in San Fernando Valley or South Bay. I hear about it. It's like, I kind of hear the distant echo just beyond, my immediate focus. But I'd like to talk directly to some of these folks I'd like to sit down with them. I'd like to have a kind of a bike summit. You think about it as a bike advocate summit or a bike blogger summit. I'd just like to get us all in a room, a little bit like the recent California Bicycle Coalition LACBC Bike Summit about a month ago downtown. It doesn't have to happen on that scale, but I think it should happen just occasionally, so that we can all be in the same room. We can start to talk about, what is the shared agenda here? What are tools and tactics that are working, and mostly just so we can start to pull in the same direction, so we're all kind of on the same page.
Right. And so you came up with a few suggestions to start with, and maybe Chicken Leather can add. Maybe I can add a couple.
Suggestions. I guess my suggestions were, looking at those issues that are important to a lot of us across the region. At that Cal Bike Summit, there was one of these sessions. Southern California advocates all sat around in a group. I guess we were probably about 35 or 40, and we just came up with this laundry list of things, everything from reforming driver's ed up in Sacramento to how we can work with cops more constructively on our local street. And that was a great agenda, for action. The problem is, how do we move that? How do we kind of, craft that into some sort of an action plan or implementation plan? And that's where I see regional folks, whether it's LACBC affiliates like a Better Bike, or whether it's just the folks that are out there active and writing about cycling, like Ted Rogers, who's just all about the safety and the injuries and the deaths on our roads. We need to kind of bring these folks together, I think, and talk about how to take that laundry list of issues and start to craft an action plan, and how we can support each other regionally.
We've had Ted Rogers on, and we should talk to people like that more. There's a bunch of bike bloggers. Chicken Leather, you follow any bike blogs?
On occasion, yes.
Yeah. Who would you follow?
I'm trying to grab here. Let me sit. On occasion, I do. Actually, when you mention things like the Cal Bike Summit that we just had and things, I'm reminded of some of the sticking points, some of the advocacy points, and a couple come to mind of just how, in a brief time, like you said, in the brainstorming workshop session, which was phenomenal. You never think that people in a room could actually come up with so many different things, everything from maybe a youth summit to engage youth, because as we know, a lot of as I think Ron Milan went off, a lot of your fundraising and a lot of your membership depends on you getting new people involved, not only within from a financial point of view, but from an advocacy point of view. And it was so good to see all these different people from around California respond more to the advocacy challenge. I'm reminded of just simple things like we're talking about commerce in Beverly Hills, which is kind of just the opposite kind of thing that a lot of cities are looking at. The commerce is there, but you're looking at things like you could even improve it more if you had a bike share program, something that would allow somebody to, and they have them in other what we would call cities around the world, where you can gravitate and travel around the city so much easier on a bike and see so much more. And you think of Beverly Hills and all the sightseeing that you could be doing instead of choking it with little vans and buses and all. I'm thinking more of the noise pollution, being a sound guy. You're actually could see bikes out there. The green bike lane that we're seeing so much and talk about. And LA finally has one, and I think they just sort of are appeasing the bike things. But I'm really kind of looking forward to go more through commerce and stuff. And I'm was reminded of a couple people that said, I travel between my two commercial shops, and it would be nice to have this not only as a safety factor, but also as to bring in more people. So if people feel safe and when they travel, they'll be safe and be able to know, oh, that's the green lane. You stay out of it. When bike people are around, it's protected. And so if it's protected, then we always forget about this, but last night, as we saw, bike people can be an economic and a biosocial sort of source for things when you're raising consciousness and of all things, whether it be commerce, sort of towards philanthropic things like a toy drive, or in this sense the small business, because all these things we think of as they are small businesses in a sense. They just have a high retail end to it.
Yeah, I love the term bike people. I'll tell you, because the terminology, how we talk about this stuff is so important. There are bike people, there are people who bike. I think what happens with a label like cyclist, we see some pushback in some communities, like up in the valley with the Wilbur road diet, and I see it in Beverly Hills also when you talk to transportation people. The cyclist, and that's in quotes, the cyclist, becomes kind of the other, where in this kind of zero-sum game here, anything you give to the cyclist or to the cyclists is something you're taking away from somebody else, whether it's asphalt or money for facilities or whatever it is. So we really have to think about bike people, or people who bike, or the people who could bike. So I just want to say, that terminology is really important. How we present ourselves, how we talk about ourselves is really important for the folks that are just kind of reflexively will hear cyclist and think, oh, that dude in spandex, or that guy who's just riding circles around me in traffic. We have to think about that. But I totally agree with your point. The cycling commerce connection is so underappreciated. We see it when we talk about Portland. We talk about some of the neighborhoods and the kind of the local movement over there. And cyclists are integral there. You look at Brooklyn, and that connection between cycling and local commerce is really well established. It's something we're not really attuned to thinking about here, because we just think about commerce and motorists. How can we accommodate more motorists, because that's going to drive traffic, when really we want to drive traffic. We don't want to drive cars.
Absolutely, and I'm reminded earlier when Metro was actually talking about expanding certain lines. A lot of the train lines go east as opposed to going west, and they were doing some preliminary studies about what would happen if you made hubs or found another way to get to the west side, and they were looking really, really quickly before this idea of almost like a football thing of doing a square out, having to go down to Exposition and then go across. And I remember going to a planning meeting, just something to feel out how people felt, and it was funny because Beverly Hills was sort of a great destination, but everybody was going, we're not going to have a stop there, and it was like, you guys are missing out. And the preliminary things were like, if you could get from there to Century City in 16 minutes, would you do it? And I said, oh my God, people would do it in a heartbeat, just to avoid all the traffic, and then to be able to look at just the offshoot in time and energy that's not wasted in your car, but now you're having a constructive way to get cross town, which is always the argument about. I remember Chris Morphus was putting over the idea of a complete street, where it's not just about the transit you see, but also making these streets complete. For right now, their only option is maybe buses or maybe some light rail or something that goes through this, but there's also the idea of making it safe enough for cars and bikes and everyone to travel these streets. And when you do that, I think everybody forgets, and I always have to point out that gridlock is infinitesimally something you can relieve by just making. If you get one person out of their car and get them onto a bike or public transit, it's like you can do that with incremental kind of things, as opposed to like saying, oh, I have to get 25%, which is a large number.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the future has to be about people-powered transportation. And complete streets is is a great way, just conceptually, to think about, getting us there. This idea that the street, it's a public space. It's not a motorway. It's a public space for all road users, for people on bikes, on feet, and motorists. And once we think about, kind of rethinking those our streets as complete streets, as accessible to all road users, why wouldn't I bicycle to Century City? The last thing in the world I would ever want to do is drive to Century City because I'm just going to get stuck in a parking garage, and Century City itself is just so kind of alien, to the pedestrian. But when we make our streets accessible to folks on feet and to cyclists, then we can start to think totally differently about transportation. Once you start thinking about, once those streets are welcoming to you on a bicycle, the whole West Side and other areas also, but the West Side, is just, it becomes so much more accessible. It's just easier to get to Century City or to get to West LA. I'd rather shoot myself in the head than have to park on 3rd Street going to a great little restaurant like Jones. I'd much rather bike over there, even at the height of rush hour, and even without bike lanes. But imagine if those streets were welcoming to me. If I had my own green lane, that was my safe space on the street, and I get to Jones and there's an available bike rack for me, and also some of my other friends are cycling. So when I look at places like Portland or Brooklyn, or to some extent Long Beach, although we have a ways to catch up with the consciousness in these other places. When you think about once that tipping point is reached, once that tide starts to turn and people say, hey, not only is it more convenient to get to a little place like Jones on my bicycle, but I actually enjoy making that trip, that's when we really start to pick up some traction and really start to see that bicycling local commerce connection much more clearly. We're in the early stages here, when we're just starting to lay down the infrastructure, the facilities that help make it happen. We're just early on this complete streets kind of concept, and change comes slowly, but once change starts to come, I think we're going to reach that tipping point fairly quickly, where people will say, geez, I don't need to drive there, when I can bike there. And you know what? My friends are also biking there. And I'm going to see other people who on bikes who are there. And it's going to be that kind of a consciousness that makes it such a joy to go to cities in Northern Europe or to Portland or San Francisco that has such a vibrant bike scene. It can happen here. It's just that we haven't reached that tipping point. We're still putting those building blocks in place.
Really, I think my impression of the way these city council things work is that a small group of people can, if they're organized, can make a really disproportionate difference in the way things go. Would you say that's true?
I think that's true. I think that we're fortunate because we have such a rich ecosystem of people who are supporting, bicycling as everyday transportation. Who really want to change that consciousness. We have people at the harder edge of the activist leading edge. People who will get arrested, who will ride critical mass, who will make noise in council chambers. And then, at the other end, you have the institutional folks, the people who are at LACBC, and even folks who work in planning departments and transportation departments who are cycling friendly. If there's anything, I think, in the long term, if there's any good outcome from this whole financial crisis, is that it's moved a lot of older, kind of established employees out of these departments, and it's brought some young folks in. And so, we're starting to see, I think, a different consciousness. You couldn't imagine the things that LADOT is doing today, and you couldn't have imagined an LADOT bike blog 5 years ago. But now there are people in LADOT who are cyclists and who are sympathetic, to the need for infrastructure. And we also, we wouldn't have gotten there without those advocates who were loudly pressing LADOT and City of LA to get its act together and get with this program. And so this kind of ecology of cycling advocates, even though we're fairly small, we can be really powerful when we work together like that, complementary wise.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the fact that when the Dutch visited, it was sort of like, more bike people, but they addressed some really definite questions, things that we sort of take for granted, that you're going to have all these buses, and they're going, why are all these buses so noisy? And you look at them like, well, they're just inherently, they go, well, what do they run on? And we're going, well, they run on, maybe some natural gas, which is a positive step, but they're going, oh, they're still too noisy. Why aren't they electric or something? We're going, we don't have it. And it was just that idea. And after that, we saw the green lines go up. And I said, well, if that's the case, let's have the Dutch over more often. But I think what they were engaging was the fact that it's not any one design that's going to do it. I remember at the conference when Ryan Schneider talked about how it's not just about doing math and coming up with this whiz-bang kind of street that has to do these things, but it's the idea that if you make it almost safe enough and viable enough, and you put in infrastructure like trees or something else, now you're going to entice a whole different group of people. It's not just cyclists that come out and they're whatever. They don't have to wear special clothes, and that's what we see a lot of at shops like Flying Pigeon or something. You're seeing bikes that people are doing, not necessarily cyclists, but people that are going, what are their needs? Oh, I'm going to need a real basket. And everybody always draws up these things about women and wicker and all this other stuff, but I look at it as a real positive thing when you see a basket. In fact, in the studio here, one of our DJs, that's Inez, who does I don't want to brag, but I made you a mixtape. She rode her bike here, and I think in traveling somewhere, she took public transportation back, but her bike is still here. Has a huge basket. It's an old 80s mixed-use design, but we're looking at something that's very amenable to what she's going to be doing. She needs a basket to carry stuff. She's going to be shopping, and it's just it's a fun bike. It's light, and we're on the second floor, and she was able to carry this up here, which is amazing, isn't it?
What do you think?
You're looking at me like, no, but you're looking at how it's. Go ahead.
Did you get that question?
I
comment?
Well, I guess I got it a little bit. I was thinking that when you mentioned what Ryan was talking about, like math. Math is a language, but it really takes the imagination to see the problems and to think about proofs and to think about figuring through solving some of those problems. And what we're talking about, making roads safe for all road users and making streets complete. These aren't difficult problems. Planners, transportation planners will, bring their design book. It's like the language of math. They'll bring their design book, and we can start to sort the stuff out. So it's not a tough problem, but it just requires a little bit of imagination. I think historically, that's what's been lacking. And I can kind of flesh it out with an anecdote. I went to the Think Bike presentations also, and I love to see.
That's the Dutch.
Yeah, this is the Dutch folks who came over and with LACBC looked at, I want to say four areas around the city. 4 specific corridors. Well, how can these be more welcoming to people who bike? And the Dutch folks huddled with some of their American compatriots and came up with 4 plans, and in PowerPoint presentations, which I think are accessible via the LACBC site. They said, here's what this corridor could look like. Again, kind of applying a little imagination and then visualizing it for folks, because we all don't have that imagination. You look at Vermont Avenue here in LA, and pretty tough to imagine that that's ever going to be a complete streets or a green corridor, but it's possible. So anyway, the Think Bike folks, helped kind of walk us through these examples. And so, back home in Beverly Hills, I'm vexed by one of our intersections at Wilshire and Santa Monica Boulevard. It's a big intersection, one of our busiest. Yeah, insane intersection. And I was actually looking at that intersection for LACBC. They were doing the bike count. I was there, volunteer doing a bike count. And as I'm sitting next to this intersection and I'm watching cyclists every once in a while come through this intersection, I realized that few of them really know how to navigate this intersection. There were dual right turn lanes, and both boulevards are very busy. And adjacent to Santa Monica Boulevard, there's South Santa Monica Boulevard, so it's this kind of crazy H kind of an intersection. And I watch cyclists, stymied as they're trying to navigate how to continue straight on Santa Monica Boulevard with 2 right turn lanes. Where do you position yourself, and how do you not get right hooked at that intersection? And so I corresponded with one of the Think Bike folks, and I said, here's the intersection, here's an aerial view of the intersection, here's what I observed. I said, City of Beverly Hills transportation folks don't seem the least bit interested in addressing the safety problems at this intersection. What do we do? So one of the Dutch transportation consultants got back to me, and he said, okay, here are several different treatments you can have for this intersection, from everything from bike lanes to a grade separated, a bike only kind of roundabout. And I'm looking at these visions and I'm thinking, holy cow! You look at that intersection today, you couldn't imagine. It's hard to imagine even bike lanes on that intersection, much less a grade separated kind of roundabout. One of these complex engineering marvels that they can do in the Netherlands and they can do in Germany and we can do. But as I'm looking at it, it's just alien to me. And then I got kind of pissed off because I thought, why am I getting these ideas from a planner from the Netherlands? Why can't I get these ideas from City Hall? When I ask at the Traffic and Parking Commission about this intersection and another dangerous one at Olympic and South Beverly, hey, what can we do for cyclists? How can we give some guidance? Can we provide a lane? How can we provide safe passage? And they just kind of look at me with glassy eyes, and yet, here's this guy from the Netherlands taking his time to not only send me examples, but also, kind of revision that particular intersection. Here's how it could
he's
look.
Being paid by...
He's, as far as I know,
His
he's
city in the
volunteering.
Netherlands.
He's a guy who's a transportation consultant who looks at this problem from the other side of the world and says, this is absolutely insane. Well, here's what you could do. And I just want to take it to my city hall and say, this is absolutely insane. Here's what we could do. And why does it have to come from the Netherlands?
Well, what if you got who would they listen to?
It's a good question. It's a question I really can't answer because I'm not sure who they listen to. I was at a Traffic and Parking Commission meeting about a month ago, and I was there, to give a little public comment like, hey guys, what's happening with bike planning? And one of our elderly residents from the north side of Beverly Hills was complaining about tour bus noise. We have these open topped sightseeing buses. They're horribly polluting, but anyway, they kind of prowl around Beverly Hills. Oh, here's where so-and-so lives. Here's where this person lives. And he was complaining that it was too much noise. And you never saw such a welcome for a community problem at that meeting as you saw for the older, wealthy resident who has a problem with tour buses. They kind of tripped over themselves to slap this guy in the back. Thanks for bringing the problem. But yet, when me as a bike activist, when I sit there and I say, hey, we've got a couple of intersections that are particularly dangerous for cyclists, I get the glassy eye, and then I get the, thanks for coming. Mm-hmm. And, so I don't know exactly who they listen to.
What if you went straight to, Cartier and the Ferrari dealership they're all moving.
No,
They're all moving.
Actually, Beverly Hills moved. Beverly Hills moved out.
It's gone. It's literally a black hole.
The BMW in Beverly Hills.
Yeah, they moved. Yeah.
Well, what if you went to like the business people and showed them this picture from the Netherlands of the intersection and said, "Would you like this?"
It's a great question because I think that we have these retailers like Cartier and Bulgari. These are outside focused, globally focused retailers. I'm not their demographic. Probably the tourist and more accurately the Asian tourist is their demographic. That tourist probably is not going to be biking. So I think our real opportunity is with the locally facing shops, the smaller shops, the strips like South Beverly, and over in our Western Gateway, we've got a bunch of small shops also, and we've got shops on Robertson and Doheny. And there are all these little kind of pocket areas that in another city would be, meccas. You'd have an independent coffee shop, and you'd have a bunch of other cool shops, and here they kind of die on the vine because they're kind of under-recognized. I think our opportunity is to talk to those folks and show them not what that intersection could be, because that's a big, hard problem, but show them what South Beverly or Robertson or Doheny can look like with bike racks and with a green lane.
Okay, so how about dressing up like Mormons with the bike and go door to door and then surprise people by saying we're not Mormons, and then say, look at this picture of an intersection.
Right, we're not Mormons, but we've seen the light. We've seen it in Portland and Long Beach. Here's what it looks like. Now, I love it. I've of course, going door to door to build awareness is in our plan book, but I hadn't considered the dress. I like the dress angle. Give us a little respectability, because when I walk in there with a bike helmet and bike shoes, they kind of look at me funny.
Yeah, looking at you now, it's like it seems like they already say, here is a demographic we don't need to impress.
Right. I think that's probably true, and I probably made a mistake early on in my bike advocacy career back in mid-2010 when I walk into a City Hall commission meeting, with my bike helmet on. Well, in retrospect, what I needed was a dark suit like all the other dark-suited guys in there who don't live in Beverly Hills and who aren't there to make the city better. But that's the audience that we expect at public meetings, and probably that's what I should have shown up as.
You could also dress how they all see themselves in their head, which is like, they may dress in dark suits, but they have another side to them, like their casual side when they're and if you can just tap into how they see themselves and then try to reflect that back to them, like
Dockers and a collared shirt.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't have any Dockers. I'm proud to say.
And carry a drink.
All right.
I'm noticing that but that's good. I'm noticing you guys are all sort of hitting around, but the face of advocacy is changing, and in fact, some of the issues that are pointing themselves in Beverly Hills is they were looking at safety, not just at the high school or at a retail level, but also the high school that's there. Beverly Hills High School has a long tradition. I think it was even used in at this seasonal thing we remember. It's a Wonderful Life was shot in Beverly Hills. That big pool was there, but they're looking at things like, well, we've had this impact from having an oil well that they've been pumping for how many years, and now we're looking at how do we relieve not only that, but the traffic that the school itself brings in, and something like a safe routes to school or something. We never think of kids getting, going to Beverly Hills, you got to get out of your car to go to Beverly Hills High. It's like it's just the opposite. But I think now, in the big sense, we're rethinking how transportation and that sort of rite of passage. It's like, okay, now you're a teenager, you want to get a car to sort of socialize with people or something, but we're seeing it turned around if we could create it with a health issue. So it's maybe thinking creatively about some of these different things, and I think that's what we're doing today. We're seeing how maybe advocacy could lend itself to other issues, sort of disguised as safety, sort of disguised as health. Imagine if kids in other parts of Los Angeles, not necessarily Beverly Hills, could use it as exercise. You're going to be stuck in a class all day, but you exercise before and after getting to school. Imagine what that could do for our obesity rates and stuff.
The conservatives, the way to get to them is talking about children, I think, if there is one that I've seen. Children, starving children in Africa. If you could just show the children, that gets their vote.
Sure. I mean, I think this idea of the kind of the changing face of bicycle advocacy is really important, because it's not a bunch of people like me walking around in a bike helmet. Ultimately, that's going to move us. We can do our part, and bike bloggers play a really important role in moving information around the community. But it's also folks like our new in Beverly Hills Unified School District. Our new chief. He himself is a bicyclist, and when he goes on his weekly check of our 4 K-12 schools and our 1 high school, when he makes his rounds, he does it on a bicycle on a Friday. And I was talking to him about this because he's sympathetic to the message, and And it's going to be folks like that who get it, who move the message out front, who show that it's not just the spandex crowd, that's interested or is banging the tin cup, but it's that kind of whole community solution. It's the safety angle. It's I've had several high schoolers come to our Better Bike meetings, and they say, geez, I'd like to ride to school, but God, Gregory, it's one of our routes that goes to the high school. Gregory is so dangerous. And Charlottesville, another one that goes to the high school, so dangerous. And so, it's road safety, it's public health, as you say, and it's a cycling in public. I should say, people-powered mobility is like a whole community solution, and I think it's going to take the whole community in a place like Beverly Hills, especially, to move it forward.
Well, maybe a lot of times in high school teachers love to do projects, project-based learning with kids. Hey, let's do a political campaign.
Absolutely. I mean, here's a paradox. Our new high school principal, Pasinger, Earl Pasinger, he's a physical education coach, from way back, and you'd think he'd be sympathetic, but I can't get the guy to return an email. So in some ways, this kind of whole community solution is kind of there for the taking, but in other ways there are these pockets of resistance or unreconstructed folks who
that's a good word.
Just maybe it's just not on their radar. They haven't really. I think maybe we haven't effectively shown them why they need to care. And that's, I think, the work we have cut out for us.
I think it's a funny term, unreconstructed folks. Is that just the most polite term for something that could be said less directly?
It is polite, but I think all the history that it conjures up, I think, is really appropriate because we have a lot of folks in our community, perhaps could be a culture agent to thinking differently about it, but there's just been no reason for them to think differently about it. We haven't presented really an invitation. So
it seems
unreconstructed.
Unreconstructed. It seems like it would be interesting to. It's such an interesting challenge, and it's such a little like a encapsulation of the problems that an activist faces, and I'm sure that a lot of people would love to be working on this. We have a caller and something about the word authority. I'm not sure.
Oh, I've been enjoying your conversation, and it's a totally valid strategy to go into a meeting like dressed incognito with dockers or whatnot. At the same time, I think it's completely outrageous, and I don't even know what adjective, really fundamentally angering that you should have to change your appearance in any way to address just such a diverse issue that it just affects all of us. And I think it's really sad that that's the level that our local government is at. And it's good you were talking about an elected official that is a bicyclist and you have a good relationship with. It's wonderful. I recently had a pretty good discussion with the DA of Eureka, California. And I think it's important for us to be open to that. But I think the fundamental thing is that the changes aren't going to come through that. And if it comes down to just people in bands going out and painting their own bike lanes or just doing whatever they need to do, I think the fundamental changes are going to happen outside of petitioning our elected officials for really any damn thing. Wow. So it's totally valid to do that. I'm not criticizing. I think both routes are really good to go. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be nice to be able to just make them do what you want them to do.
I think
us just going out there and doing what we as a community know need to be done. And if the police come in and try to shut that down, it's just another expression of the police state showing its true colors. But this is an issue where, species have already gone extinct. Whole fucking species of crabs is dead because of these polluting human fuckers. Right. And I'm sick of it, man, and it's ridiculous that you would go into a meeting and not be completely listened to, whatever you look like, when you're bringing up such an important issue.
No, I said after I said it, I'm being cynical. That was a cynical comment. What were you going to say, Mark?
I was going to say, I agree with your caller that it's it's not an either or, but it's a both and kind of approach. I think that it's just so critical, and we recognize that it's a thorny problem. Not a tough problem, just it's a thorny problem because of entrenched resistance and just conventional ways of thinking, and the only way I think we're going to make real progress on it is if we just kind of attack it in a multifaceted way. Everything from the folks at the leading harder edge to the folks that are more comfortable working through the institutions and working, working behind the scenes. Folks in spandex and in active shorts, active bicycling shorts, and also folks in Dockers. Ultimately, it's. I think ultimately it's the frustrating part is that it's a solution for everybody. That bike lane makes it safer and more comfortable and convenient for cyclists. It also makes it safer for motorists in the long term. Their liability, is reduced because we separate the modes of traffic. And I think, once we kind of recognize just how multiply beneficial these kind of steps are, I think, we can't help but get more people on. It's a matter of the tipping point, and again, I think just getting the message out to the folks that are, unreconstructed, the folks who just haven't stretched, kind of a very non-limber imagination around what the problems are. That's our role, I think, as activists and advocates, is just to kind of get out there and stretch that imagination for them.
Oh, man, I agree, and it's a really important point that you made of the multifaceted approach. The people who are more, like you were saying, more gritty and more, anarchist in the streets, whatever, don't be too vanguardist. And the people who are essentially liberals and want to go through the ballot box and want to go to the city council meetings, let's have them be open to the more radical approaches, and let's all unify more. It could be something like the Popular Unity in Chile, which was really the extreme far left all the way to the center. And that was the power of what they were able to do to change a society without violence.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's the ideal, of course.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think we're, like a lot of the movements that we've seen in South America, the people movements, these, they have these moral and ethical claims, and they build such a broad base, and the solutions are so obvious that they eventually, over time, they can't help but build and then reach the tipping point, and then we see. Real change through the ballot box, like you say, not just violence and unrest. Has its place.
And I think that's the exception, is through the ballot box, even though that was a really wonderful time in history when that happened. I still think that's the exception, but let's be situational and just react to whatever's in front of us and kind of find the best way together.
Absolutely. I think, like you mentioned, that the DIY, the painting the bike lanes and hanging DOT, authentic type signs. This is really the most imaginative edge of activism, and it's necessary. We've got to work in the council chambers, and we also have to work out there. And damn it, if they're not going to lay a bike lane down, we'll lay a bike lane down. I think that's just a tremendously constructive way to go.
And that's even more, look, and I agree, I'm going to let you guys move on, but that's more exciting to me, though it's fine if something is done through petitioning somebody, but that's still petitioning power. That's, a false power telling us what we can or cannot do. It's always valid, but, like striking down the Jim Crow laws to work for that, of course, but it's much more powerful for us to just be out there without any authority telling us what to do and just taking right action.
All right, this is Nick again. Thank you so much for calling in. What was your handle again?
Oh, yeah, it's DJ Matter Embryo, and the reason I'm a DJ, though I'm not actually currently one on the air, is because I've been associated with Free Radio Santa Cruz, for many years, and I'm still, kind of a cohort with those folks up there.
Very cool. Thanks you for listening.
Thanks for your show a lot. I appreciate it. Cheers.
All right, cheers.
Just for some of our listeners, Free Radio Santa Cruz was actually shut down. We have a famous picture here of the FCC coming in and taking their equipment away. This is when I think Kill Radio was still in its infancy, but it was one of the stories we covered. I'm reminded also of the fact that we had a sister pirate station here in Los Angeles for a while, and we too were met with this before we turned to the internet. But getting back to some of the issues he raised, it's more along the lines, and I'm going back to Rollers and Will from the Armed Librarians last night. They always talk about education within these things. It's not just to sort of butt heads a lot of times. It's about maybe a dual education, not only on cyclists' parts, but especially on the police and authority.
Activism and education, they're kind of the same.
They all join together in that sense about the more you know can only improve your quality of life, as opposed to sort of just like you're caring and pontificating all the time, as I'm doing right now.
So, do you want to?
Can I add one thing?
Please.
Yeah. The caller, when the caller talks about the DIY stuff, and we look at these really imaginative tactics, laying down, people's bike lanes and stuff. I think it's important to recognize that. I think probably the single biggest step we can take as cyclists is just simply to take the lane. Under state law, under the California Vehicle Code, we're allowed the entire lane for substandard lanes. I think typically that's defined as less than 14 feet wide, which is by far most travel lanes. Very few are actually wide enough to share with a motorist or a bus or whatever. So I think the step that we can take, the claim that we can make, is simply to claim the lane because that lane is ours. It engenders some frustration among the motorists. But I'll tell you, every day when I take the lane, I'm so happy to take that all as my space. If I'm not going to be provided with a bike lane, I'm going to take the lane that's given to me, and that's much better than trying to squeeze with a motorist. As we're both traveling along. So take the lane. That's my suggestion.
I think you just infuriated a motorist. Did you hear that? Chicken leather, you were going to say?
I'd have to concur with that. That's just the idea that that's how real change or real education is going to happen, not with legislation, which we've seen a lot of times, or in some cases just enforcement or incarceration in the ultimate things. I'm reminded when you speak about certain things like touring and stuff, that there was a incredible ride we used to do on the first Fridays of the month called Ride Arc, and they addressed this thing. And one of the places that we did go through one time was Beverly Hills, and sure enough, they didn't get it. As the din of the horn continues here, maybe the car is in an accident or something. But what it raised were questions, and it wasn't so much just questioning, but it was also like, well, here's an alternative to how we do this. We were all about doing a tour with that many people as an alternative to like getting your car or somebody doing a PowerPoint presentation. We were actually visiting a lot of these sites and just locations around town where things had happened and how the powers that be at the time addressed it, and what if they had addressed it this way? What if instead of just meeting it with force, they met it with the idea of tolerance? And then you went to certain sections of town and saw how tolerance and just working as the caller said, he was dealing with issues about civil rights and stuff. Sometimes I think about bike issues as being the ultimate, because we get no respect or anything, but we do have a sort of a say that they say, oh God, we got to listen to this. So maybe just expanding that. Well, I want to wrap my point up. Maybe you could wrap it up too here, Nick.
Well, I just want to thank Mark for coming in today. Mark Elliott from Better Bikes in Beverly Hills, and
betterbike.org.
And yeah, I think we had a lot of great ideas. So thanks for coming in.
Thanks very much.